My name is Richard Rosen, and I live in beautiful Berkeley, California. I was living in Oakland at the time, a little bit just across the border from Berkeley, and I was feeling rather blue for various reasons at the time. This was back in the late 70s, and I was sitting around in my apartment one evening, and something sort of rang a bell in the back of my mind about feeling unhappy with myself, and it brought me to a book that I'd looked into several years before when I was a humanities major in college that I'd had to read for a class called What is Man? And at the time, which was the mid-70s, I had no idea what this person was talking about. And in fact, on the test, that part of the book, I failed miserably to describe what I was supposed to understand. And the book was by a man named Jiddu Krishnamurti. I believe that people in Ojai may have heard of him before. And it was an amazing 180-degree turnaround. I pulled this book down, started to read it, and all of a sudden it made perfect sense. Krishnamurti then led me to other areas of spiritual investigation. Peter Uspensky, for one, and then from there, one of his students, whose name was Robert DeRopp. And the book I found was called The Master Game, and in that book I read that yoga was the best exercise that had ever been invented. And so I was living, as I said, just across the border from Berkeley, where at the time one of the very few yoga schools in the East Bay, this was the late 70s, or 1980 I guess, was located. And so I went down the street a couple of miles and took my first class in May 1980, so I've been a practitioner now officially for 35 years. And I haven't looked back ever since. I was a student at the Yoga Room, which is the most venerable yoga school in the East Bay. It was established in the mid or late 70s by the sort of the granddaddy of all East Bay yoga teachers, whose name is Donald Moyer. And I took classes at the Yoga Room with Mr. Moyer for a couple of years, and for some reason that I do not now recall, I decided that it was my calling to start attending school at the Iyengar Yoga Institute in San Francisco, which at the time was located at Clement Street. And I began a course of study in probably 1982 at the Iyengar Institute, and that took me, it was a 3-year course at the time. I'm not sure what it's like anymore, but it took me 3.5, 4 years to finish the requirements, during that time, of course, I was asked to substitute for various teachers along the way, and it wasn't easy for me. I wasn't, and I'm still not a particularly extroverted individual. I'm more or less an introvert. And so it's really hard for me sometimes to describe exactly how I ended up in this position, sitting on this table in front of this camera. But I did. I feel very fortunate that I'm here. But I don't really remember what motivated me to become a yoga teacher. Well, I mean, having real friends for a long time is a blessing, and to have friends who are interested in the same kinds of things that you are, who are very interesting people, who are very talented people, who are very intelligent people, who are a lot of fun to be with. I've been very fortunate to meet people who I've become, they're my yoga family. And I love these people, and I've known them now for, what year is this, 2015, almost 35 years. And I see them regularly, most of them anyway. One of my good friends lives back east, so I don't see him as often, but the other three that I consider good friends live in California, and I see them quite often. And you know, we spend a lot of we try to spend time together periodically and have lunch or dinner or do this or that, and I feel very fortunate to have this small but very tight community of people. And there's other people who are out there who I met at this institute who I'm not quite as close to, but they're still very good friends. And yeah, I have a very close family of yoga friends. it's useful. It's just not necessary, but it's very useful to be in the same sort of mindset you're all together in sort of this same kind of how can I say this? We all have the same experience, and we all teach in ways that are no longer exactly the way we learn, but are close enough in the essence that we still understand each other very well when we talk to each other about what we're doing. It's very useful to have friends who are willing, more than willing, and very generously willing to share what they have learned with you in order to advance your own practice. And it's also very useful to have friends who are very supportive, who, when you come to a roadblock in your travels along the way of being a yoga teacher, you'll have somebody there to sort of reach out and grab you by the scruff of the neck and pick you up and say, now you're going to try this, and this will help you to move along. So these kinds of friendships, if you're in a training program now yourself, I strongly encourage you to look around that room the next time you're there and see that there are going to be people in that room who you'll be friends with for a very long time, and who will have a very significant impact on your life. So I think that one of the first qualities, there's several I guess, but the first one that leaps out at me is somebody who listens to what the teacher's saying. Very often I'll be in a yoga class where the students are sort of off doing their own little thing, and of course, being who I am and the training that I've had in the past, that doesn't particularly sit well with me, and I get kind of grouchy about that at times. But I think it's very important first of all, for the student to be interested in the practice, not just come to class once a week for 90 minutes, to stretch his hamstrings or tighten their buns or whatever they do in certain classes, but also to have a little bit of interest in a little bit of yoga history, and to listen to the teacher. I'm coming back again to this point. My students, my regular students, tend to be people who are a little bit older, who are a little bit more mature, I guess you might say, and who when you get into class, you can see that they're not looking around to see what other people are up to and comparing themselves in any way with what other people are doing. They're perfectly satisfied with their own practice, which is how I encourage them to be, and who are engaged in what's going on in the room, and who will follow instructions precisely. It's not uncommon nowadays for students to be a bit lackadaisical about following very detailed instructions that probably a lot of them are not used to the level of detail that some teachers provide, including myself, and that they miss the essence of the class because they're not really paying attention to what exactly is being said. But I'm very pleased to say that most of my regular students are very good listeners, and they understand the need to do things in a very methodical and detailed way in order to get the most benefit from the practice that they're doing. Well, it's, any yoga practice in a class is, any yoga practice that you do is a practice for your life. I mean, if you step out of the classroom and forget about everything that you've done in the class, then there's really not a whole lot of good that comes out of it. You might be more flexible in the end or whatever. But to me, the practice is a preparation for doing things in the world. And when you learn how to listen in a yoga class, and presumably then you carry that out into the world with you, and you learn how to listen to people when they talk to you about things, and you learn how to listen not only to what's being said, but learn how to listen to what's not being said, which is also just as important. And of course, that then helps you to engage yourself in your life, which is the purpose of being alive. When Krishnamurti was asked what the purpose of life was, he said, the purpose of life is to live. And that's to me, that's the main thing. A lot of the old yoga practices, you gradually withdrew yourself from life because it was seen as a distraction or an obstacle. But to me, the real meaning of a yoga practice is to get deeper into the practice, or into life, I should say, to fully enter into your life and be completely present, or as present as is possible for you to be all the time, or as much of the time as is possible. Your engagement in what's around you is very intense, not in a way that's overpowering. You realize that you are simply everything is. I think probably the thing that I would just say to that is that you appreciate being alive, and that things are around you, no matter how difficult things might be or how troubling things might be at times. You understand that that's part of being alive. There's no reason to deny that or to criticize that. It's just a matter of what is. And you have to take it all in. There's no, the soul doesn't differentiate between pleasure and pain. It's all an experience. And so, that's also our work in the world, is to take everything in equally without trying to reject or prefer pleasure to pain or whatever. It's all just a matter of experience and understanding the full range of what it means to be alive. It doesn't change anything. It's just what it is. I can't. If I fight it, it makes it stronger. It gives it energy. So when I was diagnosed with Parkinson's, I realized I help people, or I try to help people as much as I can, who have Parkinson's. And one thing that I notice about them frequently is that they're in denial. A lot of times when they're first diagnosed, they don't want to admit that they have it, and they fight it in one way or another. And I think it's a natural thing to do, is to resist that idea that you have a disease, a relatively incurable disease, that can lead to disability, pretty serious disability. But at the same time, it's who you are. And I think for me, one of the things that's been key all along is that I've been able to, through my training, is to accept it. This is me. Let's see what we can do to work with what we've got, and to accept what is. I mean, that's basically what Krishnamurti told people to do, and that is to just take it in and stay with it. Acceptance is being loose. When you reject something, when you isolate yourself, you create a grip. You can, after a while, feel the ego very, very clearly with enough yoga practice, and you feel the grip. And the grip is body-wide. It's in the throat, in the tongue, in the groins, in the belly, in the feet. It's everywhere. And that's what the ego is a grip, because it's holding on to being an individual. And acceptance is letting go of that grip. I can't really tell you what it feels like entirely, because I haven't entirely let go. But what it does feel like when I'm able to let go of at least a bit of it is that it's very easy. Things become very, I don't know exactly what the word is, but one thing that I notice most of all is that my breathing changes quite a bit, and that the grip that I normally feel in my throat or in my chest or wherever, it softens a bit, and my breath is much fuller, which to me is an indication that you're also engaged in life more completely, because breathing is an exchange between yourself and the universe. And when you're open to the universe, you're open to your own breathing, and then it's not you breathing any longer; it's the universe breathing through you. I've been very fortunate to be where I am nowadays as a writer, because A lot of teachers that I know have been struggling over the years to get themselves published in one way or the other, and I've never had to do anything. People have come to me all along and just said, "Hey, you want to write a book?" I'm like, "No, okay, I'll try that." It's very challenging, as I'm sure most of you who write know, that for me it's a practice. It's a spiritual practice. It's very educational because I do a lot of research before I do any writing, and it's a joy when it comes out right, and it's a perfect drag when it doesn't. You know, you can't really predict what's going to happen when you start to write a book. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And the thing about that is, when it doesn't work, you just got to keep going. And you can't. It's like what's that guy's name in the Bhagavad Gita? Krishna. It's what he says is there's no effort is ever wasted. So even to me, even if I've spent a few days or a few weeks writing stuff that isn't really useful or intelligent, no effort is ever wasted. I keep that in mind, because you know, you've got to get through the bad stuff to get to the good. I enjoy writing generally, and I enjoy expressing things in ways that are very compact, very precise, and I enjoy writing things that shake things up a bit. And what the book I'm working on now will do that, not in a cruel way, but I think that there has to be certain things mentioned about contemporary yoga in this country that that need to be brought out. My yoga hero right now is Mark Singleton, whose book, I believe, The Yoga Body, is one of the most significant books written about modern yoga in the 21st century. And I would like to follow in his revered footsteps, not to cause anybody any harm or any pain, but to make sure that people understand the truth. Or you know, there's three sides to every story: your side, my side, and the truth. So I'm trying to get as close to the truth as I can without creating any more distortions than there already are. My friend Rodney Yee has been a major influence in my life, and I love this man like a brother. So now I'm crying. I'm going to stop now about him. But my friends, my yoga friends in general, and it's not just Rod, but the women that I know, that Mary and Patricia Sullivan, Mary Pavard and Patricia Sullivan, also powerful people, extremely powerful people, and I feel very fortunate to have them in my life. Well, first of all, yoga is not a journey. It's not a path. It's where you are. And if you believe you're on a journey, you're probably heading in the wrong direction, because you're heading in a direction that's been influenced by your brain. And as we all know, our brains have gotten us into a lot of trouble, and we have to get past that. So my feeling is that there's nowhere to go, that you're already where you're supposed to be, except you just don't know it. So I think that anything that you can do to intensify your self-awareness is something that is very useful, and that most people have a difficult time with that because they become absorbed in what's in front of them and lose sight of who they are, who it is that's involved, who it is that's absorbed in whatever it is going on. So I think it's very important to establish, initially anyway, an attitude of detachment, not in a way that makes you cold or uncaring, but in a way that keeps you honest about what's going on in front of you and who you're dealing with. You don't necessarily have to be, you're honest about what's going on in your life. And if you're a jerk, you're honest about being a jerk. Or I think it's very important to stay conscious of the fact that you are engaged in your life, and that you are creating something unique. Everybody has their own way of going about their business, and you have to understand that you are a part of a great universal project, which is the discovery of who am I? Or, on the flip side of that coin, how can I be truly happy? Everybody is involved in that project, no matter who they are, no matter what they're doing, whether it's a good thing or not such a good thing. And I think that you have to, the important thing is to always be conscious of the fact that you are engaged in this tremendous work, universal project of discovering the truth about the truth. And it's incumbent on each one of us to stay conscious of that great project, universal project, which is why the universe exists. And that is to discover who it is. And each one of us are agents of that consciousness. We are working in its employ as means of experiencing the full range of life. Each one of us is contributing some small experience to that great, huge, universal experience, which will one day result in the final, ultimate realization. I don't believe in enlightenment. I don't believe that there's anybody in this world that's enlightened. I believe that that's a long way off. But when the last person in the universe is enlightened, the universe will then snuff out. It will disappear, and about 5 seconds later, will reappear again under a new guise and start all over again. Because the energy that drives everything is curiosity. And then the question is, who am I? And that the answer to that is forever open-ended. There's no final, there's no final answer to that. It's just a process that goes on and on forever. And it's a process of discovery. And hopefully great joy, although of course at times it can get kind of unhappy. But we have to do that to get to the joy. So I think the main thing is, if you've ever heard of a man by the name of Nisargadatta Maharaj, his guru told him to simply continue to ask himself over and over again, who am I? And he finally figured out a little bit about that. And I think that's a really good practice, and just continuously ask yourself, who am I? But don't try to answer it. Wait for the answer to come.